Good afternoon. We are here filming today for the Hamilton Jazz Archives, and it is our greatest pleasure today to have with us a trumpeter, vocalist, and a man who's seen the history of jazz just about from its inception. Welcome to Doc Cheatham.
Thank
It's
you.
a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Doc, why don't you tell us what you're up to these days, because I know when we called you and tried to get together with you, you have a pretty busy schedule.
Yes, I do. I've never had a schedule like this. Never before.
It's great.
And it's still going on. People calling me every day. And I don't understand it because it's new.
Would you tell,
It's new. It's a new thing to me.
do you remember what you told me on the phone when I said, well, you're pretty busy? Do you remember what you said to me?
I don't think I
Well,
do.
he said all the other trumpet players must be sick.
You know, look, it
I'm sure
seems
that's not
that
the
way,
case.
but it's not the case.
See,
I guess it's just the difference in the new generation of trumpet players against the old trumpet players. It's not the same. It's altogether different. The new generation and the generation to come, it's going to be different.
Yeah,
It's going to be that way all the way.
yeah.
Each generation has its influence about jazz. All of it's going to be entirely different. I'd like to be here 50 more years than here.
Uh-huh.
So,
See what comes next.
yes, I am. I'm very interested in that.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of the kids today, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised to hear what they're playing. They're playing so pretty, so beautiful, and I wonder where it's coming from. But now I see where it's coming from. You feel I follow Roy Hargrove because he's such a nice guy. A lot of the guys don't like you to bother them, you know. Roy's very nice and a wonderful player. And I follow him. I'm watching him very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I see him, there's something different about his conception of jazz. Very nice, too.
Where do you think his influences were?
Well, I'll tell you, his influences were from all the rest of the young trumpet players of his era,
Mm-hmm.
because they all have the same influence, but with differences among all of them. There's a slight difference with all of us, even the old timers. There's a difference.
Do you
Slight
consider
difference.
yourself an old timer?
No, almost.
Almost. All right.
Yes, that's the way it is, and I'm very excited about it because what I went through, I don't think they will ever go through what I had to go through to become a player, especially a jazz player. They never had to go through that because they can hear more than I heard when I was young. I didn't hear hardly anything. I mean, Louis Armstrong, a few guys like that, but most of them all sound the same, had the same conception of jazz. They're all, back in my days, they were all alike, except Louis Armstrong.
Tell us about Louis. Tell us about his style. What made him the musician of his day?
Well, Louis Armstrong, only God can answer that question. I found out a lot of things about him, but I met him accidentally. And he was very nice to me and his wife, and he helped me a lot. For what reason, all I did hear, because years ago he was not too friendly. I mean, the musicians from New Orleans were not too friendly with him because they were jealous because he was one man that came and outplayed everybody that had a horn. And they were jealous of that, of the way he played, and what his jazz conception of jazz was. They never heard anything like it in their life. And a lot of them didn't like it because he received so much attention. And there's nobody in the world could play like him. Nobody had the knowledge of not only jazz, but anything else in music than Louis Armstrong. I found out in New Orleans, I met an old fellow down there. There's not too many people, old people that knew him. and I found an old fella down there sitting down eating some cornflakes on potato chips on the sidewalk. And he looked at me, he said, I had my horn, he said, you a musician? I said, yeah. He said, what do you play? I said, I play cornet, but I play trumpet. And he said, you know Louis Armstrong? I said, yeah, do you? He said, I know him like a brother. And I sat down on the sidewalk behind him, beside him, and I said, what about him? Why is he so great? The old man said, but I'll tell you. He said, you don't know this, but he could outlast anyone in the world because he was born with a double jawbone. That's why he has so much power and so much range and could outlast anybody with a horn. You can't last forever playing a horn. You get tired. He had never gotten tired of playing.
Oh, my goodness.
So this guy, old man, said he had one of those big double, and I inquired about that, and that's true. He had the strongest jawbone of anybody. He was born like that. That's how he could outplay anybody. Nobody could compare with him. Those little things I learned a lot about.
That's very
But
interesting.
he was very good to me. He helped me so much that I followed him around, and he gave me jobs, sometimes with him, sometimes I worked for him. He kind of grilled me, like, took me on his wing when I was young. I was in Chicago, 1926. So I stayed with him as long as I could, followed him because he got so great that he had to travel all the time. And I never saw him anymore. Maybe once in a Pullman car, so on the train I saw him, but he was going too much for me. I couldn't afford that.
Wow. Would you step into his band sometimes as a substitute?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I did that several times.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And I wasn't a good player, but he thought it was. I mean, he said I was. That's the kind of man he was. I had no right to sub for him. I told him that.
He must have thought you did.
Well, I don't know. As I said before, he didn't have too many musician friends. See, he had some good players in Chicago. Not only, I wasn't anything. I was learning. He had a lot of good players from New Orleans, trumpet players in Chicago, that they made it tried to make it hard for him when he first arrived from Fletcher's band. They resented him. But when he started playing, they all began to respect him.
Didn't have a choice, right?
That's right. He was the hardest thing Chicago's ever seen, never heard.
Wow. When you were a boy in Nashville, right? What kind of music was going on?
Nashville was sort of a very quiet city. Well, there was nothing going on there. We had too many colleges and too many schools. We had medical colleges, we had all kind of colleges in that. And everybody was going to school, you know what I mean? And there would be some students that would come from the South, like Savannah, Georgia, Atlanta, come to Meharry Medical College. And every now and then, maybe a guy, violin player, he may come there to study medicine or something, but he played violin, We had a drummer, we had a violin, we had a piano player, we had a tenor saxophone player there. He was a dentist, and Herbert Bloom was one of the great pianists. I never heard anything like it in my life. And they all came to Meharry for different, the studies. And while they were there, they got acquainted with one another, and they formed a little group while they were there. And they played for like a fraternity thing, proms and dansons, they used to call them on Saturday. People that did all that stuff. But they didn't raise in a lot of excitement, but they were available whenever there was something to be. They needed a group. No one else other than Jimmy Luntz was there. He didn't care for playing for anyone, but he wanted. Forming his band was the biggest thing he ever thought of. And his band, most of his group were in Fisk University in Nashville. And see that he had a band. And I was alone. I wasn't playing with anybody, but I was studying like that. I taught myself to play instruments. And I taught myself to try to play well, And so I was alone. I didn't play with Jimmy. I didn't play up to Meharry unless they called for me. Once in a while they'll call for me to play, like a first Sunday they'll have something for the band to play. And things like that. And I just worked on my own. I just worked on my own because there wasn't anything around there anyway. There was no money around there to earn. I would go play in the church. My mother would carry me to the church on a Sunday. I'd play a solo. Stand up there in the church and play a solo on the cornet.
Uh-huh.
Little things, this old, not jazz, but old melody. I forget what the melody was, but I played it. I did things like that. I'm a self-taught musician, up to a point. Things I needed to know that I couldn't teach myself, I would ask from the best, from the best I could.
Were you still playing the sax at that time?
I played the sax in Chicago until I met Louis Armstrong, and I listened to what was going on in Chicago. They were one of the world's greatest musicians were in Chicago. They were all from New Orleans. They all came to Chicago from New Orleans because Al Capone brought them in there. Before that, Chicago was dead, other than the stockyards, and you could smell that all over Chicago. Stockyards. But other than that, there was nothing there. But Al Capone formed his gang and sent to New Orleans, got all those great musicians, brought them to Chicago, and put them in all kind of joints. Even with shoeshine parlor, he'd put a trio in there.
Oh my God.
And they would sell his own beer and whiskey in all the cabarets and nightclubs. That's what he did. So he made Chicago, it was one of the richest cities in the world, because there was money flying all over Chicago. Cabarets, nightclubs, and everybody playing jazz, Jimmy New, all those great players from New Orleans were there. So that's why Chicago was one of the greatest places in the world. And Nashville was nothing other than I go to church and play old sad, secret solo, and they had a lot of people there try to imitate McCormick, and things like that, and women trying to sing well, opera. That's all you would hear. Once in a while, there would be a band come to Nashville once a year, Paul Whiteman, and give a concert at the Ryman Auditorium once a year, and people go back to here. Ted Lewis. Those are the only two that I know of that came to Nashville. Ted Lewis once a year, and me and my shadow and all that crap.
Yeah.
And that's all. Otherwise, everybody's going to school. Everybody was going to. All my family. I was the only black sheep in the family. It isn't because I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to go to medical school. See, my brother was there, and my uncles and everybody in my family, except my father, were in medicine. I didn't want to do that. I was stuck with my horns now. See, practicing my horns all the time till I got to a place where people started listening. It wasn't great, but they were listening to the toning down of whatever I was doing because I run everybody crazy.
Tell us about playing with Benny Goodman.
Oh, I was with, I had a trio down on Broadway called Jack Silverman's International. You never heard of it. He had great reviews, like he brought the reviews from Europe, those big casinos. The Jack Silverman, he had, a lot of people don't know about that. And he had a place down the basement, right on 50-something Street, right across from the old Palladium, right. He had one of the greatest nightclubs, and I played down there with a big band, the show band they call it, and I played with the relief band. I only had a trumpet, piano, and drum. Between shows, I played that, and I played that for about 6 years. It was nice. I learned a lot of tunes. Every day I'd run across the street and buy tunes. I think I know more tunes than any trumpet player on earth. I learned it. And so it wasn't too much money down there, but it was a nice job. And Benny Goodman had a brother named Harry, and Harry came down there. It was mostly a Jewish club anyways. And Harry came down there, and he heard me play it and do the intermission. Anyway, he called Benny Goodman right away and said, I got a trumpet player for you. But Benny was having trouble with trumpet players. He couldn't get along with them. There was good players like Charlie Shavers and, well, I guess the other guy that played with the, well, you know what I mean, Glenn, what's it, Glenn, what's his name?
Glenn?
No, you know how to, my memory's not like it should be. Maybe it is like it should be. Gleason. See?
Oh, Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
Well, this guy I was trying to play with him. He's the one that made that, played for that band that played with Jackie. Yeah, he's the trumpet player that played that. He played with Benny. He couldn't get along with Benny Goodman. And Charlie Shavers couldn't get along with Benny Goodman was a very peculiar man. But he was a genius, and you find all geniuses sort of nutty. Something all wrong with all of them. And I was with the Latin band. I was with a new Latin band here called Ricardo Ray and Bobby Cruz. And we played up to an auditorium, Hunts Point Auditorium, one night. And Benny Goodman was playing there with the band, and I was with Ricardo Ray. We had two bands there. They had two bands there. And I played with Benny, and Benny took ill. He had a back problem, so that was his last engagement. So the Latin band heard me play solos, and after the dance, they came to me and said, "How would you like to play a set with us?" I said, "Fine." So I went over and played a set with Ricardo Ray's band. They were kids from under college. They were out of sight, and they had music. And I read everything. I read like flies on the paper.
Yeah, great.
And I read everything. And solos, they gave me all the solos, just with the timbales and and they all fell out. They said, "Gee," and they got together and hired me for their band. And the next day, they had a recording date downtown.
Oh, man.
And I just played solos and what I saw on the paper. And that became one of the biggest hits they ever made in their life. All over South America, people had that coming down there. I was 79. One day he had 79 old man play trumpet. Because the solos I played were not Latin, they were American, with the Latin beat.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys made a lot of money.
Wow.
Not all through South, all over South. And they paid me very well. They treated me very well.
That's
So
great.
that's how I got with Benny Goodman. And before that, I said I was with Benny Goodman. I played 2 years with him. We went to Las Vegas and other places. He played with the symphonies sometimes and played jazz after that with his sextet. He was very good to me. He fired everybody in the band at one time but myself. Because, you know, people can't understand the man's a genius, and he expects his men to play as well as he played. He expects that. And if you can't satisfy him, you have to leave. That's all it is to it. And he has a hard time finding anybody like him. And he chose me for that because of his brother, recommended me. And I made an audition with him. He and Hank Jones at a place, and I just played, and he played with me, and he played. And he liked what I played. I didn't know everything he knew. I couldn't know all the melodies he knew. But he was very easy on me, because I was an easygoing guy, you know. So he was nice to me. And one day we were in Las Vegas, and he and I was standing out in front of the band, we were playing, and he had a habit of starting out on one tune, and he would switch to another tune without telling anyone.
Uh-oh.
He did that all the time. He'd pick up a car and start to play Body and Soul, and after chorus and half, he made I surrendered there, and not tell anyone. And that's hard. It's not right. But that's where he is. He was. So one day we were standing out front. I said, "Benny, I don't know." He said, "Listen, just watch my eye. Let's look at my eye." I said, "My eye will tell you when I'm going to change to another tune." I said, "Okay." I said, "But I can't see out of this eye." So he fell out laughing. So he and I, we had a lot of fun together. I'm the only one that stayed in that band with his group. Because I know him. Right away I knew how to treat him. Don't try to be a big shot around him, you know. That's all you have to do. Just let him have it. It's his job. Let him have it. What he asks you to do, you do. That's all. He fried everybody. Everybody in the band in rehearsal. We had a rehearsal at Skitch Henderson's studio, and we were playing the most beautiful solo he was, and we were with him, Stardust. He played so beautifully. He just took out his clarinet and started. He don't tell you, let's rehearse this, and what do you want to do, fellas? He don't do that. He just took his clarinet and played the da-da-da-dee, played the melody and everything, and then he stopped all of a sudden and started taking the clarinet apart and walking out. We said, what's wrong with this man? He walked out, and he stayed out into an adjoining room. And so his valet came out and says, and I said, is this all? He said, yes, this is all. He said, don't call me, we'll call you, one of those things.
Uh-oh.
So everybody started going out, packing up and leaving. I was the last one to leave. I don't know why, but I was. He opened the door and said, where are you going? I said, well, everybody's fired. Valet said, everybody's fired. He said, not you, so he kept me. I guess I worried him because I kept my mouth shut. Because in Las Vegas, he got me there was a lot of segregation, but I couldn't go in the hotel.
Oh, dear.
But he went across from this big casino, and there was a woman that had a nice house. And he took me over there and introduced me to the lady. I said, well, sure. So she gave me a room. And I sat on the porch most. I love porches. I sat out on the porch. Benny came out he was staying at this hotel, this big casino. He came out with his golf things. He crossed the street, and he saw me sitting. He came all the way back on the porch. He said, Doc, I said, what? Does anything ever worry you? I said, no, Benny, I don't think so. I said, but there's only one thing that will worry me if you don't give me my check at the end of the week. He fell out laughing.
What year was this?
Lord have mercy. That must have been that was, I was 7 to 9. I was on 7, close to 7 to 9. I could.
Yeah, so not that long ago.
No,
I mean,
he was very nice. He fried everybody. If he didn't like it, he would make it hard on you.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did the drummer, the poor drummer, Maury Fell. He would always introduce Maury as an imitator. I don't know, they must have had some kind of words. And he fired Maury Fell, the drummer. And I thought he was a great drummer. But Benny was a very strange man. You just have to leave him alone. And that's what I did. I didn't bother him at all. So he kept me. And he liked the way I played too, because I didn't try to be a big shot, like I didn't try to overplay him. I let him do let him star, because that's what he was. My father was very good in teaching me a lot of things about diplomacy. He was a king of diplomacy, my father. So I think it pays off.
can I take you back to your early days in Chicago? And it seems that in music, every once in a while, there seems to be a time when something new happens fairly quickly, like with rock and roll in the late 50s, or some classical composer writing something brand new. When you were young, was jazz first called jazz? Do you remember what the music was? Was it like you felt like you were into something really new here? Is that a fair statement, or?
Well, that is a fair statement. But as I said before, back there in the 20s, my goodness, such a rock and roll was never heard of.
Right.
But there were people that sound like rock and roll back in the 20s. As far as 1924 in Nashville, we had people called Holy Rollers. They had tents, and every night that's all you could hear. People rolling on the ground and singing singing, nothing but that's all it was. Singing old blues and rolling, and they called them holy rollers. That was the beginning of all that stuff. That's the beginning. That's great.
You know, this. I wanted to ask you something about this. You know, there's a lot of black church influence in the music.
Absolutely.
And I'd like you to talk about that, some of your experiences, because, you know, when I pick up a lot of books on jazz history now, it's like they don't say anything about the black church.
Mm-mm.
But there's, you know, a lot of, that was the pillar of the community, and a lot of the energy and spiritual feeling inside the music came from there.
Yes, but they were almost all alone. It was a long time before the whites decided to go hear these people, the Fish Jubilee singers. And I right there, I knew every one of them. My mother-in-law took me out fish. And they were alone for a long time before they were even discovered. You had Julius Bledsoe, a guy like that. You never heard of him, I bet. He was before Paul White.
Oh.
I mean, Paul Robinson.
Yeah.
Julius Bledsoe. He had the biggest name as a vocalist in the world. But he was never, they never paid any attention to it because that's the way it was in the South. But afterwards, I mean, years and years after, they look these people up, try to find them. Fish Jubilee singers are reorganized and they're going, and they're being recognized and heard by everyone. But that's the trouble. That was the trouble.
Well, it's a whole statement in itself that the Paul Whiteman was called the king of jazz
Yeah.
at the time, and his band didn't, you know, that was like a sweet band, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was a very good band of its time, and he had the best musicians that he could get in that band. Some great players, and it was a good band.
Mhm.
You have to give him credit. He had a wonderful band. Wonderful band. But you know, but right after he died, a little bit before he died, he had a black musician in there, in his band. I forget his name now, but he could pass for white. You would never know that he was white. Trumpet player.
Oh, gee.
And he was hired. Paul White knew that he was black. And he's just about the end of his career, he used this guy. This guy was a great trumpet player. But things started seeping in once in a while. Not Ted Lewis had one too.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought Benny Goodman was one of the first guys
No,
with
absolutely
G.
not.
Oh,
No.
well, that's a interesting fact.
Yeah, well, a lot of people didn't pay much attention to that in
Uh-huh.
those days because it wasn't obvious.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
And that slipped in like that. Yeah. But those were good old days, and as you say, Johnny Dunn, if you ever have heard of him, was the first black trumpet player that played jazz in the style. Now he moved up from I started in New Orleans. New Orleans is where it started. You know, I mean jazz. I'm not talking about the Africans that came over with the drums. I'm talking about horn players. It started in Louisiana. I was there. I went all through everything they had there. I know exactly what I'm talking about.
I want to ask you something. You can probably tell us about this. Tell us about Congo Square.
Who?
Congo Square.
Where's that? New Orleans?
Yeah.
New Orleans?
Yeah.
Well, that's one. I was there 5 times. I never heard of Congo Square.
No kidding. I thought it was a...
No, you see, I never knew there was a New Orleans when I was in Chicago in 1926.
Oh.
I was stranded there. That's how I got there. But I never knew anything about New Orleans or Louisiana on the maps or nothing until I got to Chicago in 1926. So there's a lot in New Orleans that I haven't been able to see.
Mhm.
I go every year. I'm going there next month. I'm going in October. I'm going almost every month. I go every year to the festivals, and they use me. They play me to death. They like me, and so I go all the time. Now, I have gone all over, I think almost all over New Orleans. I haven't finished it. There's so many places. You've been there. There's so many places. And you go, you can just stay there for forever and never finish, never completely visit everything about New Orleans. Jelly Roll's home and King Oliver's home and all those guys. Even the cemetery is something to see down there. That cemetery is falling down, it's all rotten, and everything is above the ground, you know. But if you go in there, you're going to see some great guys in there. It's great to go. I never cared for cemetery, but that's one cemetery everybody should see that know anything about jazz. You got guys in there, man, 1700s players. It's all written on their tombstone,
Wow.
all that. All of it's half fallen out. Humphrey's the two Humphrey brothers already died. Percy and Willie. Percy died about 2 days ago.
Oh dear.
They were the great trumpet players. Danny Barker, and all the rest of them. And the guys was way before I was born, musicians. And it's so sad that we didn't have a recorder back in those days.
Yeah.
See, that's so sad, man. That would have been something, oh gosh.
Yeah, because we can only imagine what
That's all we
what
can
they
do.
were doing.
That's all we can do.
Can you tell us about your first recording date?
With Morena?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I was with the Albert Wynn's Creole Jazz Band when we made that recording. I knew Morena because I sat in the Basie Theater playing shows with the pit band. I wasn't getting paid. I did it because they let me do it.
Oh.
And I just did it. Trying to learn as much as I could. And Morena, she came to, she was the ugliest blues singer on earth when she got old. But when she was young, she was pretty. You see her picture, she was a pretty, nice looking girl. But she's so ugly. That's what they call the ugliest blues singer. And they billed her as that.
Oh my God.
And she taught Bessie Smith. She was Bessie Smith's teacher. And in Chicago, she used Albert Wynn's Creole Jazz Band, and I was in the band. And that's how I recorded with her. She was very nice, very, very, very nice woman. And we played all of our songs. And that was it. That was 26, and about in the 30s, someone gave me an album of it.
What was it like, for our students who are used to hearing what they do to make a record these days, in the $1 million studios? What was it like at that time to make a record?
Well, after this place where we recorded with Morena was just a room. They didn't have any speakers. We had a big megaphone we put out in front of the band, but no speakers. And everything was done on wax. We didn't have we didn't have all that stuff.
No fixing mistakes, right?
No. And my first next recording I did in Spain, in Barcelona, with Sam Wooding's band. Sam Wooding, you never heard of him?
Sam Woody?
Wooding.
I've seen the name.
Yeah,
but
Sam Wooding was a band in New York. And he turned down the Cotton Club rather go to Europe with his band than to play in the Cotton Club. That's how Duke got in there. It wasn't for Sam Wooding. So he took a band, Sam took a band to Europe in 1927, the latter part of 27. I joined Sam Wooding and went to Europe with that band. And that's the second recording I ever made was with Sam Wooding in Barcelona. And you can get that now, it's now on CDs. It's a great, great band. The band was so great that no other band in Europe could compare with it. Now they were there in 1923. They went all through Russia, all down in Argentina with that band. And I joined the band, said, first part of 28. And we just went over there and played all the big casinos and hotels because he had a very big name. And we recorded up in Barcelona. It was hot as it is now. and the wax kept melting.
Oh.
And they tried to put ice cubes on the wax to keep it from melting. But they came out wonderful.
Wow.
You should hear that. You should hear that CD, because Sam Wooding's band in 1923 was not the same as 28. On one side is the first band, on the other side is a newer band. Man, you just can't believe it after hearing the difference, because he had some great arrangements when we went modern. And it was like, on one side, it's like Mickey Mouse music, cartoon music.
Mm.
And on the other side, it's very modern. Right today, it's modern. You should hear that band.
Wow.
And that was and I stayed in Europe 3 years, and I recorded it with Pathé with Sam Wooding in Paris. And I wrote one of the arrangements. I studied that too, but I didn't. It's too much for me. Too much headaches and eyes and all that. Write it. I don't think I made but one arrangement in my life, and that was in Paris to Sam Wooding, and that's on there. I have that.
No kidding. That's good. It got recorded.
Yeah, yes, it did. And I came back. In 1930. I left Sam over there because I got tired of being over there. Came back and I recorded with Marion Hardy, Alabamians, the band out of Chicago. That's the band that Cap Calloway took over. And I played with Harding, and I went from that to McKinney's Cotton Pickers in Detroit. And I recorded a whole lot of things with that band. Then from there I went to the Cotton Club with Cap Calloway. And I stayed there 9 years. And we made so many recordings, 7 to 8. You know, Cab, we made so many, I can't even count them. I think they're making a lot of CDs of those things. And I've been doing that. I've been doing little side recordings of different groups, you know, some that you never hear of them. Some groups come over here from Europe or different countries, and they give me an opportunity to record with them. Sammy Remington out of Sweden. I'm going to Sweden next month for 10 days with Sammy Remington's band, south of Sweden and into some parts of Sweden out of the way. But I sort of refused that on account of my knees and my hip. This arthritis making it hard for me to get around, and I turned down a lot of things. You know? Well, I can walk pretty good, but it shows. So I was in Elkhart, Indiana, last week, and they had a wheelchair right there at the airport, and I didn't have to touch a thing. They had my bag, my horn, and they put the wheelchair in my room in the hotel. Came and got me when it's time to play, run all through the hotel. It was fun, you know. But I could get up and walk a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the reason I'm trying to turn down all those things. I want to stay in New York. I know. I mustn't say that, but I don't want to stay. I don't want to leave Europe if I have to go. But I'd like to, you know, stay in America and play here.
Yeah.
Because it's
Well, we want you to stay too.
It's getting too difficult with the wheelchair, you know.
Yeah.
And all the crap. You got to go to baggage. People are nice. So they do everything for me. But it's, you know, you get tired of that. Cause.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I'm enjoying it. I'm going to Sweden and do those 10 days, and I think come back. I'm saying that, but you know, a lot of people keep calling me from Europe. Come over there. But it looks bad. The trumpet musicians get in the wheelchair over there. It looks bad. Look like you're too old to get around. You know what I mean? It doesn't look right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to give it up after this.
I wanted to ask you, you know, do you have any specific concepts about jazz education, about the way that this music is taught in the schools? And have you been asked to be a guest speaker or lecturer in a classroom?
Never. I've been to several schools out South San Diego. They had me down there for about a week. And they had me every day I had to go to the music class. Where the kids had musicians. They had about 25 trumpets and all these saxophones. There must have been about 100 musicians down there in the class. And they were beginners. I mean, they could read, but they did not learn how to play in tune. And I didn't want to say anything, but I would go to listen to these guys, these kids. They're in the teenagers. I mean, these teenagers. And I went to this class at San Diego University, and they were going to play something for me, And what they hit out on was Stan Kenton's arrangement. And I never heard anything so bad in all my life. Every one of them were out of tune. And their horns would sound bad, and you know. I had to sit up there and listen to that. Then they had some Count Basie arrangements. And I couldn't believe how bad. And you have a teacher standing up there saying, nothing, nothing. The first thing those kids have to learn is to play in tune with one another. Your age got to be with my age, or whatever it is. And but when you're playing and everybody's out of tune, this was the worst thing I ever saw in my life. And the teacher's a friend of mine, and his name is Cheatham, Jimmy Cheatham. You ever heard of him?
Gee.
And I was afraid, you know, I was waiting for him to tune up. But the teachers, they don't care, I don't think. And I went out on the back of the school and sat out there, and I could, to myself, I said, how can that be? These boys are 17, 18, 16 years old, 15 years old all now. And don't realize that they're out playing out of tune. So they will never, most of them will never become musicians, because you know that's important.
Oh, yes.
You hear something like that. And I was sitting out in back of the school, two kids came up to me, I was sitting on the bench, and they asked me how did I like the rehearsal. I says, the only thing wrong, I says, everybody's out of tune. And I asked one of the kids, I says, look, why don't you guys get together and I asked one of the guys, I said, do you practice your scales? What do you mean? Do you practice your scales on your own? No, we don't do that no more. Can you imagine that? That's San Diego University.
Oh.
And I think the teacher got mad at me because I got angry with me because I got angry myself.
Yeah.
What in the world are they teaching these kids? And I went to, Harvard or something, one of those, Berkeley. Way up in Massachusetts, I went to, it was the same thing. They were just blowing noise, making noise on their own, and trying to play like dizzy.
And loud too, right?
Huh?
We're playing loud
Woo!
too.
Never heard that.
Yeah.
They're all playing one another, out playing one another, playing all those riffs dizzyly. I taught once and the beginners, and I got to the place where I said, the heck, let them have it, let them learn. I can't do it. A woman brought her son down to 40th Street where I had a studio with another fellow. And she brought her son up to, and came in and introduced herself. Brought her son, and she, on her way, she bought a trumpet on 40th Street for him. She wanted to play trumpet. They came up there, and first thing she says to me, this is my son, whenever I have a horn, now how long will it take him to play his horn? I said, what do you mean? She said, how long will it take you to teach him to play his horn? I said, lady, he may never learn to play that horn. I said, how on earth can you ask me a question like that? She said, well, I brought a book for him to look at and you can teach him with. And she opened the book, and you know what she had? Dizzy Gillespie's book. Oh, boy. She hadn't opened the case yet.
Wow.
I said, lady, I'm sorry, you go down the street, you may see somebody down there that can help you. I said, I can't do it to you.
Oh, man.
But those are the kind of kids I had. One of the successful kids I had, out of 60, maybe about 4,
Mm.
and they were white and Puerto Rican and Cuban and so. And they'll listen, because they have music. Those guys have music in their soul in the first place.
Uh-huh.
You see what I mean? That helps.
Yes.
That helps. And so I've had success. One of them, I don't know what happened, one of them in the Navy, he came by and thanked me to death, thanked me for teaching it. Because he was playing, came to me and he's playing over here. He said, I want to change to here, like it should be. I said, that's where it's supposed to be. So I put him in front of a mirror, and made him look and took his mouthpiece, and I said, that should be in the center, so both muscles can be used. So if you're playing over here, you're not using this muscle.
Uh-huh.
And he couldn't make it. He couldn't save his life. He'd come every day and say, I can't do it. I said, you can't do it because you say you can't do it. And I said, you buy your little mirror, and you everywhere you go, you put that mouthpiece up there and start a buzzing, make a buzz with the mouthpiece, and just watch it. He almost got run over down there. Across the street, he had that mirror up there, and he was, I said, don't take chances like that. But he came back a couple of years ago and thanked me. He got it. And he's not playing trumpet, he's playing a French horn in the military band.
Uh-huh.
But that's a funny thing. But I just had to give up on teaching because most of the kids come in late, some don't come at all, and you wait for them, they don't come at all.
Yeah.
And I just stopped because I like to play. I like to play. If I can help someone, I will, but I like to play, not teach.
Uh-huh.
Teaching is awful, especially on the instrument. But I like to play. You get this. Well, hurting can help you. You can be hurt on your instrument if you start teaching too much, because you're going right back where you started.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And
In other words, too much of it is
too much teaching.
too much of it is remedial.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I learned that right quick because I had
Well,
Cuban.
I think that might have been the case with your friend in California. After you hear young students for so long,
Oh yes.
your ears get desensitized
Absolutely.
to like playing in tune.
I
you know.
realized that right quick, and I gave up.
Yeah.
No more. I started going out playing, and we were playing with different groups, and
Oh.
things like that. It's sitting in. But as being a trumpet player, I was always playing as a lead trumpet player. I wasn't a soloist in big bands. I was a lead player. Well, every big band I played, from Chickwell, Sam Woody, everybody, lead, because no one wanted to play lead. Trumpet players didn't want to play lead when I first came around here. They didn't want to, they'd leave from even the Preservation Hall band, they didn't want to play the lead. They wanted a solo, everybody wanted a solo. So I made up my mind, well, I'm going to be a good lead trumpet player. And I think I did. All this band. And after that, after Cab broke up, and I went to with the Latin bands. That was one of the best things that they did for me for my health, because I began to get powerful. I got real powerful just playing solo. I had my I could stop when I get ready. But playing Latin band, you don't have to stop. You just keep going and going and going. And that gave me a lot of power. And being a lead trumpet player gave me a lot of power. And so right now I think I play too loud. But I can calm down. I learned how to do that too. But I mean, sometimes I can't help myself. I'll play a solo and come and make a sound like a master. You hear it all over town. But that's surprising to me because of my age. I had no idea that I would ever be a jazz player, but I wanted to do it, and I just did. And after playing all the lead, I started looking back to the things I learned with Sam Woody and Louis in the New Orleans music. That's all I did
Yeah.
for now. And I went back to that, and I started doing it. It's very slow. People give me hell. You're so trying to playing jazz when I was playing jazz. Some of the musicians, people that I know said, "What are you trying to do? You can't play." I couldn't. It took a long time, long time, because I went back to when I was learning things. And one day I went to Nice, France, for the festival, and I took our quartet. I think that helped better than going sitting there with some other group. And the people run up, came in there, and every part of the section of the festival, everybody was listening to us, our quartet. And it made me feel good. Then I started playing. I just let everything out. I forgot about my what do you call it?
Inhibition?
Yeah, I forgot about that and started playing. People that I knew from France asked me, said, "What's wrong? We never heard you play like that." And I used to hold back, but I stopped doing that. I used to hold back and let somebody else do it. I'd still do that if I see what I'm playing in a big band. I don't try to hog anything, but I have more confidence in myself than I've ever had in my life. And I forgot all about lead playing. I could probably do it, but I forgot all about it. And all these harmonies that I taught myself are coming back to my brain. And all the cycles of the fifth, all of this coming back to me. I read a lot about things, you know. And now I feel like I've never felt before in my life. And I don't fear getting up and playing.
That's fantastic.
I used to fear that.
It's almost like you came in a big
Yes.
circle, and you've done so many things
Yes.
with your horn.
I don't understand
That's
it.
great.
I don't understand it to save my life. That's what has happened.
Enjoy it.
Maybe I told a girl, she wrote about me in the magazine, she called me the late bloomer. So she came out of the club and I said, "Listen, I'm not a late bloomer." I says, "I'm a electric light bulb." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "When it's getting ready to blow out, it gets brighter." I said, I could blow, I could just finish any time. I could just give up any time, you know, just fall apart. Being 90 years old is not easy. You know.
Wow.
It's easy if you think about it. I don't worry about that. But a lot of people look at me like I'm nuts or something. How do you do that?
I think you're just creative.
It's something. It's something. It's something that has changed overnight, helped me somewhere. I know a young lady in New Orleans, you know, the people in New Orleans are very superstitious people. She said, "Louis Armstrong is looking out after you." I called her last night. She said, "How you do?" She said, Louis Armstrong is looking out after you. And I'm saying, "I'm glad somebody's looking at you." And I keep a little silver engraving, little metal thing on my horn of Louis Armstrong. And everybody said, "Oh boy, that's Pop."
Yeah. Can you tell us just a little bit about playing with the Basie Alumni group?
Well, that was, what do you call that, was a...
The Countsmen?
Countsmen.
Yeah.
And you know, I never tried to play that style of music. Buck Clayton, the Sweets Edison, and the rest of them. I'd never tried to play, because that's a Western band from Benny Morton's band. That band started out playing blues. That's the way Benny Morton. And then later on through the years, it started swinging. And it was still with the blues accent.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never a blues trumpet player. But if I had to play, I'll play. But everything they had was swing and jump. And I was offered a job with Basie. He asked me one time, he came and heard me play, and he turned around and said, "Gee whiz, I didn't know you played like that." But I said to myself, I hope you don't ask me, because I can't play it. It's hard to play the style of combinations. I never was successful with it. I like Duke, you know, and I like other bands, the Cotton Pickers. I like quality, and I never was good at that jump stuff. You'll never hear me play unless I have to. If I'm forced to, I'll do it. But it's just not a style for me. And because it's all blues. And there's nobody in the world can play like Sweet Edison and Buck Clayton. They were the greatest basic trumpet players.
Yeah.
And no one else can play like. That's why no one can play like Louis. They're in the class with Louis Armstrong.
Wow.
And you can't kid yourself, you know. I'm not going to jump in a band like that. So the council was never successful. We had Earl Warren leading it. He was taking the lead. He was leading the band. And he did it. He wasn't in Count Basie's band as the leader.
Yeah.
See? But he couldn't make it. He's too loud, and he was excited, and he got upset all the time if things didn't suit him right. You can't do that. No, I'm just playing, and I thank God for what I'm able to play, whatever plays, and I'm having more attention paid to me than ever in my life. Everybody called me a great player. Well, if I am, I appreciate that, you know.
Uh-huh.
But I still don't think I am. But I'm doing what I know how to do. And you have to listen to what your opinion is. That's okay. You see, I don't claim to be a great player, but I'm having a lot of fun.
All right. Just a couple more things about. Can you give us a sense of what was happening to the bands during the Depression years?
Yes.
Was that a tough time?
Well, you know,
also?
during those days, the Latin musicians from Latin countries like Puerto Rico came here, bands, musicians. And they had a dancing school here, and they had a band in there that played all Latin music. And it got to the place where that's all the people wanted, was Latin music. And the bands would come in, and Marchito came in and organized a band. Tito Puente came in and organized. Because I taught Marcelino trumpet, but he could never learn. He had one of the greatest Latin bands there was in the world. I have his tape. Great band. And all of his rhythms section, his reed section were all black musicians, all the saxophone players. But Hot Lips was the only Cuban trumpet player in that band, and he had a band out of this world. Tito Puente came to this country, and he sat in with the Marcelino guy. And then they started having that dances. Everybody's going to the Latin dances, all over in Brooklyn, all over here, at Carver Haynes. Everybody was dancing Latin. And it got to be a big thing, so I got into that. It has just now started to fall, and I don't know why. They're still recording, but there are no more dances, there are no more Latin bands, not in New York. You know, that it wasn't like it was years ago. And then when Dizzy joined Cab Calloway's band, he started listening to Latin bands. And that was a generation that came up at the same time of kids like Rowe and Freddie Webster and all these beboppers. And Dizzy left Cab and started doing his own stuff. Because he liked Latin music. See? And then here come the followers, the young kids like Roy Roman. I'll bet you've got 100 or more young trumpet players in here than anyone else. And they all come out of Juilliard. And they all play alike. They sound good. Mm. So that's where it started. Then Parker, when Parker started, Parker came here with J. McShann's band. You know, I heard him play in Philadelphia with that band. But he wasn't playing like you. He was just sitting there reading music, and that's all in the band. But all of a sudden, he's a late bloomer. He was a late bloomer. It came out all of a sudden. Charlie Parker came out and ran everybody crazy. And the followers followed him. Saxophone players followed him. That's what you have now. You have more alto saxophone players now than ever was. And they all can play, and some good ones. You got some, I think, what's the guy's name who wears that leather cap over there? I forget. But I think he's better than Charlie Parker. But you got a lot of them. and you got a lot of dizzy. So that's where you start. That's where you start. And you could forget about jazz in those days. It was out. You had nothing to do. Nothing to do. You had free jazz concerts down in Stuyvesant Casino, places like that. But you wasn't getting paid.
Oh.
That was free, and we were doing it just to have something to do. There was nothing else for us to do. So the beboppers and they were out last of the Latins.
Mm-hmm.
It was a mess. And the Dixieland got moved up in there. I started playing some Dixieland with a ballad band on 52nd Street over with Jimmy Ryan. And that was there in competition with, everybody was in competition with one another. 52nd Street was the savior of jazz. That saved the whole thing. But those beboppers, man, they were downtown and all those, La Bamba and all those clubs. And Earl Garner came in there one day. And I played down with the Machito down to La Bamba. Yeah, and Earl Garner came in there. A lot of people had the rumor say Earl Garner cannot read music.
I've heard that from somebody.
He was in the audience when I was played in La Bamba. It was Machito's band, big band. We invited Machito invited Earl Garner to play. And I think Earl Garner misunderstood the thing. He didn't mean for him to play, but introduced him to the audience. And Earl Garner got up and came up to the piano, you know. And the piano player got up and they put all that Latin music in front, like Rene wrote. He sat down and played every daggone one of those parts.
No kidding.
Yes, he did. And I tell everybody that Earl Garner just had everybody fooled. He played all those music.
Wow.
And those ranges are hard. Latin.
Yeah.
Whoa. And he played every one.
They have some. Did it take you a while to get used to the rhythms?
Oh, I was fired. I was fired the first time I joined Machito.
I mean, it's.
They fired me because Mario was the leader of that band. And Mario and I played with Cab together. And Mario liked the way I played. He said, gee, I'm going to organize a band. And says, I want you as my trumpet player. I said, fine. So I joined Mario when he left Cab first time. And he organized his band. He had me in the band. He had me playing, and he fired me the same night we rehearsed. I could get with that rhythm to say about it. He fired me very nicely. And then what I did, I moved back to 110th Street and Fifth Avenue. I just went there and joined a little cajuto, they call it, every Saturday night. There'd be fights in there, man, people throwing chairs every night or something. But I played with a little band there until I stayed there until I learned the beat. And then after I learned the beat, Mario hired me back, and I stayed in the big band a long time.
Right.
But it's hard, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Nothing easy about it. But I feel now I could play. But Dizzy came in there, he broke all that up. Now he started his type of playing in the Latin bands, and that's what they're doing today, most of them. You hear those arrangements, they have the Latin, bebop mixed up in there. That's where it is. It's really, so right now we got a lot of things, we have no place to play, you know, because the only recordings industry have to break up all this stuff. So all you can do is, but I think it's coming back. I'm quite sure it's coming back, especially jazz. Jazz is coming back.
Well,
I made
on those positive words,
I made that
I
CD,
see.
And
Great CD.
I don't know why Sony, you know, I was surprised when they invited me to do this, because, you know, Columbia, that's one of the biggest
Yeah,
recording.
it's a good label.
But he invited me to do it, and I did. I'd like to do another one, but, you know, they will probably won't do it. I have two from New Orleans you ought to hear. I have one from New Orleans called Swinging Down to New Orleans. You ought to hear that.
I'm sure we'll be getting
You
it
should
for our
hear that.
archives.
That's on what they call, that's the name of the album, Swinging Down to New Orleans. It cuts that to death, man. It's 17 different New Orleans too, and they're selling like hotcakes. And this is nice. I like it. They wanted me to do something on Miles Davis, but I can't. I can't play like Miles. Why would anyone on earth would ask me to play one Miles Davis tune? So what I did, that's what song is one of their favorite, clients is about Miles Davis. You walk in the office and this is a picture of Miles big as that wall. They asked me to play something for Miles Davis. So what I did, I show you how ignorant I am. I played one of Monk's tunes around midnight. I just started, I had never played it before.
That's a hard tune.
I've never played around midnight before. Did you hear this one here?
Yeah.
Everybody called, I got a call from England the other day. Gee, that's the greatest around midnight I ever heard in my life.
Well, I thought it was a good choice.
I did it right away to get it over with. And it did come out.
Oh, man.
It did come out to be nice.
Well, that tune was associated with Miles, too. So
Yes, I thought it was Miles too, and I didn't.
Great.
But I liked it. That's one of the solos that I liked very much, was that solo I did on
All right.
around midnight. I had some young kids from college came in 2 weeks ago to the club. All three of them trumpet players, and they stayed all day, all night till we finished. And they came up to me and asked me about playing, and they said, they loved that. They asked me to play it, and I haven't played it since I recorded it. But I said, you guys sit down. They said, and I played it, and it just came out. It's difficult, but it just came out automatically, all right. And it's hard. It's not easy to live more. But just to play the chord with the melody.
Major changes.
And everything came out fine. I was surprised when I said.
Well, you're doing something right.
Well,
I think it's right.
One thing I'm doing right, I'm having a good time.
I think that's half of it.
Yeah, I'm having a good time. I'm playing. I don't care who I play with. I play with Wynton. Wynton likes me so much.
Yeah, I saw you on TV with him.
He likes my playing so much. And John Faddis too. John, they all treat me so good, wonderful.
Great. Well, on that upbeat note, Hamilton College would like to thank Doc Cheatham very much for joining us for our Jazz Archives. It's been a fascinating hour. And when they talk about living legends, it's sometimes an overused term, but I think we can use it here.
I think it
safely.
applies.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.